let's not go down that,
So it's really.
because that's the answer to the,
That's excellent. Thank you, Charles. I assume it'll come out today, so.
Is Lori back there?
Now
Hi.
I'll have an answer in terms of that you weren't involved in. Yeah, sometimes we hit upside the head to realize, like, I should have had you. Because you know, lots of folks in the human services space, which good for you.
I'm spending enough time.
I hear you.
I didn't like sitting through these when I saw them.
I hear you there too.
Can we do this? Yeah, so.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Northampton County Council Budget Meeting for Human Services. Before we begin, is there any courtesy of the floor?
Something now.
Lamont McClure, next door. October 25th, 2022. Dear Mr. McClure, this report contains the results of the Department of the Auditor General's performance audit of the Northampton County Graysdale Nursing Home, Graysdale, with regard to the costs that were reimbursed by the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, DHS. This audit was conducted under the authority of Sections 402 and 403 of the Fiscal Code, and in accordance with 2020-2021 budget implementation provisions of Article 17L, Sub-Article B, Section 1715L of the Pennsylvania Fiscal Code, 72 PS, Section 1715L. The audit was not, nor was it required to be, conducted in accordance with government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller of the United States. The performance audit covered the period July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. Sort of the worst part of the pandemic, with updates through the report date. Our audit objective was to determine whether services for which the costs were reimbursed by DHS were rendered. We planned and performed audit procedures to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to the extent necessary to satisfy the audit objective. We believe that the evidence obtained provides a reasonable basis to support our results and conclusion. We selected and reviewed 60 claims that were reimbursed by DHS and found that documentation maintained by Graysdale supported those services were rendered in accordance with applicable laws, associated regulations, and policies without exception. Accordingly, we issued no findings or recommendations, and management indicated agreement with our audit results. In closing, I want to thank Graysdale for its cooperation and assistance during this audit. Sincerely, Timothy L. DeFore, Auditor General, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other courtesy of the floor? Yes, sir.
In line with this, what I would say is you take it and you can read it and have a chance to digest it. We're having a committee meeting next Thursday, Human Services. So then if you have any questions after reading it, we can get into that at the committee meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Courtesy of the floor? Okay, let's begin with the Human Services Program. Ms. Wondolowski, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay. I think that this might be the simplest and most straightforward budget that I've been able to present to you all in 5 years of doing this. So I thought we would go through each page of the Human Services budget. I can give you the highlights from each page and then answer questions as we go through. So the first page that I have, and I don't know which book it's from, but it's one. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'll call the pages if that's okay. I just want to know if you have any overarching comments before we go through each one.
So just a few highlights. The DHS makes up about 56% of the county's total operating budget, as most or all of you know. For DHS, over 93% of our funding comes from the feds, states, and fines, fees, and miscellaneous items, and only 6.3% of our budget is county dollars. Health Choices actually makes up the largest portion of our budget, followed by Graysdale and then CYF. The only overarching theme that you will see on almost every division is the increase in personnel costs. And rather than tell you every time I get to the page the same thing, when the union contracts were finalized for 2020 and 2021, union staff got retro pay plus their step increases and all of that. So their budgets had remained, or their salaries had remained flat in those budget years. So it all ends up coming sort of to a head at once in the 2023 budget. So you'll see a jump in those, but that's the reason for each one of them. So that's all I have, Ms. Fargo Hefner, on that.
I guess the only question I have to start, and maybe it'll come through each category, but you received a lot of money separate from the CARES Act, or you specifically, your department received separate funds from what the county received. So are some of those monies still embedded in this budget? And are we looking forward?
Aging is the only division at this point that still has, I think it's now ARP money, not CARES money. And I don't think any of that had been in the original budgets, but it comes up in the budget amendments with you all. But they're the only division who still have some of those dollars remaining that have been allowed to carry them over to 2023.
So all the mental health money and all the drug and alcohol money from that particular funding stream is
Spent.
not in.
Correct, so it's not in the 2023 budget. The
Now,
opioids.
The opioid money, where is that?
So the opioid settlement money is not in this budget. It will be getting, actually, I think it already has its own special revenue code, or org, whatever the accounting lingo is. And that money, we received it after the budgets were initially prepared. So you will see that funding in the spring budget amendment.
Okay. And are there any other funding streams that we should be aware of that we haven't heard about so far this year, that are coming or that you've gone after and we haven't heard back yet?
I wish, no.
I mean, I think it's a fair question, you know.
We've gotten money from a lot of places the last year or two.
Okay, so then we'll begin. Page 160 and 161 in the white book and 161 in the blue book.
So, excuse me, page 160, the Human Services Program is at the top of the page. This is really just a broad summary of each human service division. And it shows part of what I already talked about, that Health Choices is the largest chunk of money, followed by the rest of the divisions. And really the only thing of substantial to note on this page is that if we exclude Graysdale from the DHS budget, 84.7% of our DHS budget, so just the DHS divisions in that building, are utilized for subcontracted services. So just around 15% is personnel and operating costs, and we're still fortunate to be able to use the vast majority of our funding for actual subcontracted services.
Any questions from council regarding Human Services Program Summary or Administration? Yes, Mr. Hackman.
Just a couple on page 161. I was reading through everything, and I just needed some clarification. This isn't a big thing, but I see investment income. We're projecting a fairly large increase
So,
this year.
yeah, so
Curious, because then I can look at my investments and you may not know.
well, Mr. Heckman, if you get an allocation for $50 million for Health Choices that you have to put in an interest-bearing account, you'll be in good shape, so.
So that's all with health choices then, right?
I mean, it's all of the funding, but Health Choices is the biggest pot. But that's where, if you look division by division, the investment income from Health Choices increased substantially once interest rates started going back up,
Okay, all right.
which is good for us. That's,
The other thing is, it looks like you took a hit in mental health.
we did not.
Expenditures by division. Mental health is going down 4 million, 23.7%.
No, so that's a good question now in terms of kind of going through each of the budgets. So, no, it's an overarching point, so I think it's a go on, Mr. Heckman. Now, as you guys know, we work on our budgets work on the fiscal year, so we're July 1 to June 30, but the county operates on the calendar year budget. And then drug and alcohol also has some federal budget, which is like September to August, or October to October 1st to September 30th. So if, for example, we underspend, if we have, to keep it simple, if we have a $1 million contract or $1 million allocation from the state, and we only spend $400,000 in the first 6 months of the fiscal year, which is July to December, it looks like we have more money the second half of that fiscal year, which is January through June, because we would have $600,000 remaining. So it's really one of those things, I think we've talked about it before, Mr. Heckman, it's just the timing issue of fiscal year versus calendar year. So none of our allocations, none of our block grant funding have gone down.
So the decrease is completely related to the fiscal year versus calendar year.
Correct.
That's all for me.
Okay.
Any other questions? Human Services Administration, 162, and again, 161 in the blue.
This org is consisting of, like, myself and my deputy, my assistant, our fiscal director, and then our program centralized data, which we call PCD. They're our data folks. Again, just as a reminder, the personnel costs, it looks like they have gone up, well, they have gone up 7.3%. And that's because of the union contracts being finalized and the retro pay. So that is where you're going to see a consistent increase in almost every division. And it's the same reason across the board. Because we pay people. Sorry. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Just in general, go back to page 161, personnel in the blue book, I think it is. I mean, you're showing in personnel $16 million budget over actual. So in 2022 projected, that's kind of in line with 2021 actual, but you're budgeting 16 million overall. And then operationally, same thing, 21, 22, relatively in alignment, but you're budgeting an additional 40 million operating. Why? Why aren't these coming into alignment with actual?
I think you'll see that maybe more specifically if we can go through each of the divisions, and then if the question's not answered, I can certainly come back to that. I don't know that I have the blue book.
I have the blue book here. You have the pages.
Is it the same ones? I don't know which ones it was.
It's the stuff that she uses. You're on page 161 in the blue book.
161 of the blue book, yeah.
You also have to remember, Mr. Brown, in relation to your question, most of this is reimbursed services, and much of the numbers that look funny when you look at the summary, when you break them down into the individuals, because the state budget runs from July 1st to June 30th, you're going to see some of those anomalies, especially when we end up then having budget amendments that come in. We have human service amendments specifically in the middle of the year once we get our new allocation. So that's going to kind of bring those numbers in the line for the calendar year, from what we look at as the calendar year.
But it should still be consistent across the,
if
I get somewhat of that smoothing, Mr. Barron, but, there's some huge, you're talking tens of millions of dollars of differences.
If I can go through each of the individual divisions, if your question is still not answered, I can also have Cindy Smith help explain. But I think some of it will become clear that way.
Any other questions at this time? Moving on to the grants, 163 in the blue, 163 in the white.
So this consists of 4 different areas where we receive grants, which is the Homeless Assistance Program, the Human Services Development Fund, Temporary Emergency Food Assistance Program, and Medically Assisted Transportation. Most of those are somewhat pass-throughs, and the MATP, the Medically Assisted Transportation, is just a straight pass-through. The TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance, is based on commodities, so that's just based on how much food. And the others, we have different vendors who provide some of the homeless services. Any questions on that one?
Yes, sir?
I'm looking at both books. The HSDF fund, what's the specific amount that we're getting?
Sure. The budget for 2023 is $150,000.
Okay. And is Human Services proper managing that, or is Economic Development managing that?
Well, that specific piece is just a small, I mean, that's obviously, I mean, relative to my budget, it's a small amount, and that is only through Human Services. DCD doesn't touch that 150,000.
Well, we would use it to plug a lot of holes at one time, HSDF funding.
Yep.
And at times it was cut off, and then at other times it was increased, and it was decreased. So you're saying for 2023, we're at 150,000.
It's been pretty consistent. It was 127 was the projected spending in 2022, and the allocation for this year is 150. But I think that number's been pretty consistent over the last few years.
Okay. That was my only question. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mr. Cusick?
Yeah, one of the things we casually say here from time to time is it's just a pass-through. Could you indicate specifically who
Sure.
we are passing this money through to?
Yes. So the MATP, the Medically Assisted Transportation, is the true pass-through on this page. And that is Lanta and Easton Coach. Lanta provides the medically assisted transportation. So for our seniors and our folks who have disabilities where they can't ride the large Lanta bus, you think of it as the smaller Lanta van. So Lanta provides all of that transportation. The state sends us the funding, and Lanta sends us the invoice, and we literally just pass the money through back to them.
Okay, and the other ones, the homeless assistance and the food?
Yeah, those are, the homeless assistance and the Human Services Development Fund are allocations, and the temporary food assistance is commodity driven. So it's really based on how much food and how much food is distributed. There's not like a number that goes
So
with
again,
that.
But specifically, who does that go to? What organizations specifically get the pass-through money?
For TFAP.
Got to come forward.
See, I knew she could answer me. CACLV.
Okay.
Thank you.
And do we put that out to bid, or, how do we, I mean, we've had a long relationship with them, but is that something that we would bid out from time to time, or?
Well, the answer is no, but I can get back to you with a better explanation, because we do RFPs for various human services contracts. As you guys know, that's not one of them, and I can get you a better explanation and a more detailed explanation about that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Heckman?
Just a
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Mr. Heckman, I mean, we're not required to do RFPs or put anything out to bid. We like to do that as best practice. There's some that just that don't make sense to do that, but I will get you a more detailed answer.
Well, and professional services, in some cases, also certain human service agencies and unit, they provide a service that you don't really get from somebody else. But I understand, I mean, Steve, I'm sorry.
Human Services, under Article 13 of the Administrative Code, Human Services is specifically excluded from doing RFPs and the purchasing procedures of other county agencies.
Didn't I
So are the
say
courts.
We still do them,
Okay, so just, and I've noticed this through the budget, and it's really not about what you're doing or not doing necessarily. It's just in general. you mentioned about transportation, and it's become a big deal, and with our population, what it is, and costs, it's becoming a bigger deal. I know more and more people I know are taking the bus and getting the aging
Yes.
that ever used it, Metro Plus before. I see the MATP grant went down 15%, 192,000.
It did not, actually. I have a side note for you. Since the time that the budget was prepared, we received the actual allocation for MATP. So it will show up in your budget amendment in the spring, but that number is just shy of 1.9 million.
Oh, so it's going to be up?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right,
Yep.
well, I only can go by what I see, right, Steve?
That's why Cindy prepares
Okay.
these fabulous notes for me.
That's fine, thank you. I was concerned because I wanted to go on a tirade against the state government again, but you've stopped me, so thank you.
I'm sure,
Thank you for saving.
find you an opportunity somewhere, Mr. Heckman.
Are there any other questions regarding the grant? Let's move on to the Human Services Facility,
Sure.
and that's what pages 164, 165, 164 in the white.
So this is a small portion of our budget. We have one full-time facilities manager, and then we have a part-time janitorial staff. And Jim was our janitorial guy. He was great. He retired in May, and to date, I don't think that O&M has found a replacement for that specific position. Jim used to work part-time in the courthouse and part-time at Human Services. So we have saved a few dollars from that, but they're looking to fill that position. The operating costs are up a little bit primarily because of the increase, some of the significant increases we saw in utility costs. And the sheriff deputies, we had increased them post COVID, and so we've just kind of reduced back to our typical 2 sheriff deputies. And the janitorial staff, we are anticipating their contract will be up for renewal or bid. And with the economy where it is, we're expecting to have to pay a little bit more for that as well.
Steve, can I ask a question about the debt service and where we are with that bond? Or just an update on how many years we're in and where
So we bought the building about 4 years ago, so we're 4 years into the bond. We wrapped the debt, so that's a larger conversation. But the reason that there is debt on the Human Services building and that we purchased the Human Services building with bond money is, you'll notice in the book, 79% of the costs for that building are reimbursed by the state. 21% is not because of the occupancy of other departments that are not Human Services, i.e. the revenue office there and whatnot. So that's the reason we have the debt service on the building and the reason we purchased it and held on to the cash that we had.
Thanks, Steve.
Any other questions regarding the facility?
Oh,
Yes, sir.
I think, and I don't know, we've had the budgets, but for new people, I think it's important, and Ms. Smith's here, Ms. Barron's here, you still charge back each division for use of
Yes.
the facility.
Yep.
So, I mean, we're helping to pay for it with the Human Services budget. In other words, we're sort of paying rent.
We are, that's
Put it that way, but
that's pretty much exactly what we're doing, yes.
Steve, was that simple enough? You're more eloquent than I am, but so I just wanted that to be something when you're looking at these things about the cost, that Human Services, they're paying out of their budget.
Yeah, it's one of the nice things is that all of those funding streams allow for occupancy costs. So essentially, that's exactly what we're doing, is paying rent.
And I just wanted to point that out. Point of information.
Thank you. Any other questions? Moving into information and referral and emergency services, 165 and 166 and 167.
Really, There's not much for me to go over on this. The personnel costs are the same, the union contract was finalized. The most exciting thing I can tell you is that the contract for our answering service was renegotiated and went up $3,000, which, the way it was negotiated, ended up still being probably a better deal for us because it's what we were already paying the last 2 years anyway. So that's the most exciting thing I can tell you about the Iris budget.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, again, was this, as Mr. Barron eloquently stated, that you're exempt, but how did you go about awarding this contract? Did you solicit bids? Was there?
We have, this is a longer standing company that we have used, and I'm confident that there is not another better deal available based on how this one was negotiated.
Well, if you don't solicit bids, you don't really know. But I had one other question, and for info and referral.
Sure.
There's a Dodge Caravan that you're looking to have replaced. It only has 46,000 miles. I see it's a 2010. What's up with that?
It's not, I was gonna say that, I didn't remember that even being in the budget.
Oh, it's in the packet that we got for, yeah, it says Human Services Info Referral.
Yeah, we wait till there's at least 100,000
Oh, okay,
miles
I'm
or
sorry.
10 years.
It says, we would like to schedule this, and then after that, it says, we're gonna push it off one more year.
I think it's the age of the vehicle is older, even though the mileage is lower, but yes, that's not,
Okay,
we're
so
not looking to
it looks
purchase one in
like-
'23.
You wanted to, but decided not to, is it, because it's,
I think that's a fair assessment, yes.
okay. It's fine then, the vehicle?
Well, I think it's been needing some maintenance and some repairs because of the age of the vehicle, but it's adequate enough to last another year.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to, because on the contracts and on tailing on what John was talking about, because we've got this up a few times. If I'm not mistaken, if it's still done the same way, as these contracts come up, I'm guessing that you and Ms. Smith and the division head, whoever it is, sits down and reviews the service, you have benchmarks, and there's a contract monitor generally.
Correct.
Do you then look and see, okay, I know, and I'll just use one example.
Sure.
A psychologist, all right? Children and youth often would have psychologists.
Yep.
Subcontracted, contract. And now and then, we'd go back and forth because of the rates a psychologist would charge versus the rates of another one. And sometimes people would say, well, we want to keep using this person because they have a relationship with the children.
Sure.
Well, no, and there's tangibles, which is the dollar and cents, and then there's intangibles. And
Yep.
being a government, and in your department certainly, the intangibles rate very highly. I mean, it's hard to put a price tag on certain things, part of being a government. So I guess the question then is, if somebody, though, is far out of line, I think that would come up when you're reviewing the contracts, I would hope. And the other thing is, I don't know if it's changed, but I know in some of these areas, there's hardly anybody out there, even locally, that did some of this stuff. Now, I mean, I would hope certainly that we're looking at different things. I know with institutions, certain institutions at different times would try to, placements, I should say, but they were institutions in those days. They would say, we're going to charge you this much and you don't have a choice.
Yep.
And sometimes a division head would say, well, I guess we have no choice. And they were loath to saying, well, wait a minute, we'll go to, I'll use an example, Topton. So maybe we won't send you anything, because they were getting more money from certain southern states. I'll use an example, Georgia, who doesn't want to spend any money locally to build anything or have. So they would pay a premium to send them up to us to house their children. So I guess I didn't want to get into a confusing thing, but I think besides the monitoring, the cost of it, there's also the factor of availability. And I don't know if it's gotten any better, but I do know that availability of providers in certain areas was really not very good. And sometimes we were just stuck and there wasn't much we could do.
I think that's probably still a fair statement across many of the services that we provide. But I will tell you that we're trying to be much more data-driven in our contract process and in our selection of contracts. And some of the language that we've put into our contracts at least 2 years ago, it might have been 3 years ago already, relate to outcomes, right? So some of our providers send us these beautiful reports at the end of every year highlighting what they want to highlight, which they're lovely and great, and some of it's very useful. But what we did was we put provisions in the contract that said you have to provide us data on these particular points. So that way, when we're having these discussions in the spring about, you know, who's going to have contracts and for how much, that's a big part of that process.
Right,
And then
and
the fiscal people do the contract monitoring and program people do
Well, I was
program
going to say
monitoring.
that you have Ms. Smith, who I know holds, I'm sure still holds the feet to the fire when it comes to the different divisional fiscal people. And she was always very good at that, even if some of the division people weren't too happy about it. But yeah, okay, so that makes sense. I just was curious how that was working
Sure.
out. And I agree, you get reports, then you got to take it and get the sizzle, divide the sizzle from the
Yep.
steak. And
Yep.
you get a lot of sizzle in those reports.
Yep.
And sometimes you got to dig to get down to, okay, well, what exactly does that mean?
Correct.
Yeah, I imagined, and I guess it still is, contracting these services out is still a major challenge since Human Services contracts so much out.
It's a huge part of our process and a large part of what we spend our spring on in each division, for sure.
That's all I had. I just wanted to
Any other
view
questions?
that.
Do you want to introduce your staff that's here? It's always good. For
Sure.
new council, I think. I
Well, they're
see
gonna
him
be
hiding
coming
behind the
up,
pole. He's the master
Come
of
up
that.
with
Which one,
There's no
Gary?
crisis, I'm hiding.
Gary Rushman is our Director of Information Referral and Emergency Services. Hi, Gary. I'm going to start over here. Alex Carrillo is our
Well,
Veterans.
No, I just meant for each division as they
As we're
come.
doing it.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry.
Gary's-
That's Gary Rushman. There you go.
For anybody who hadn't met
Thank
him
you.
yet. Thank you for all you do, sir, and your staff. Okay, any other questions with that? Moving on to Veterans Affairs, which is now Alex.
So
Come
that is
forward.
Alex Carrillo. So Alex, have you been in that two years almost? 2 years. 2 years is crazy. Time flies. So I guess this one will win the award for the most interesting budget because it's the only personnel request we are making of council this year. The Veterans Affairs Office consists of Alex and his assistant, who is full-time. Alex is a veteran service officer in addition to being the director of the office. We are the only county in our surrounding area that has only one veteran service officer. So you all have heard me give, glowing reviews of Alex here, and many of you have gotten your own feedback about access to services now that Alex is at the helm. And I think shortly after he took over, we started having that conversation is, does he need another person? And we've spent the last 2 years really trying to compile that data to make an educated decision and then request of council. So we are asking council for to create one full-time veteran service officer position. Alex does have room in the VA office. It's probably the last place in the building that has room for a person because he has more filing cabinets than you can ever imagine, but he's been working on getting the documents scanned, so we have room for this person if the position is granted. So just some data for you to consider. There are just over 17,000 veterans in Northampton County, and that's per some census data between 2016 and 2020. Alex and his assistant are making new appointments every day for veterans to come in and see him. And Alex rarely takes a day off. And even with that, he's still booking out appointments 4 to 5 weeks in advance because he's a one-person show. I think we've really learned about some different community outreach and events that we could be attending and participating in to increase access to services for our veterans. But Alex just can't, he just simply can't do all of it alone. In addition, I think, I'm not sure, I think Alex talked about it when he was here this recently, the new PACT Act law that was passed in August of '22 increased eligibility and benefits, and so we anticipate a higher influx of veterans seeking compensation. So that is our request for the Veterans Affairs Division. Any questions? So the increase on the personnel and operating costs on that budget are would be for an anticipated additional full-time position, and then the startup costs that come with like the office furniture and computer. Any questions?
Okay, moving on. Graysdale.
Do you want to finish the rest?
67 and 170.
Okay. Let me grab my stuff so Jen can come up. Sorry, Jen. Sorry about that.
Do you want to start with a statement, Jen, or do you want us to just ask you questions?
Sure. I just wanted to thank for all the support that you've shown Graysdale over this past year. I'm pleased to announce that Graysdale does not require any county contributions for the 2023 budget. We did receive generously the ARP funding that you approved, and those were specific items, so we're very happy and thank you for that.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Jen, do you mind going down or looking at the, I'm looking at the blue book.
170, Ron?
Yeah, 170. And I just had a couple questions, just so I'm clear on the revenue side. Because you have so many sources of revenue.
Yes.
And I realize you don't control it, but you can explain. Let's see, I guess I'll just go with this one. Medicare Part A is going down 37%. Now, I realize Medicare Part A, I guess, would be, an example would be the,
Short-term rehab.
yeah, short-term
Rehabs.
rehab. Are we projecting that down because of rate changes or because we are not doing as much short-term rehab?
We projected it down because we're not doing that many short-term rehab. My goal is, though, as of January, is to reopen a short-term rehab.
Yeah, that's closed right now, right?
Correct.
But you're hoping to reopen it. And I
Correct.
understand because of staffing, that's important. So, okay, so that explains that. And then I guess we'd follow on with the UPMC right above the line item above it. I'm sorry, I'm on the blue book yet. I don't want to.
Nope, so you'll see the UPMC, the PAHW, and then the AmeriHealth Mercy.
Yeah.
Those are the Medicaid CHC community health choices that, so the residents, instead of getting straight MA anymore, they have to choose one of those three participants. So those are the projected amounts. Now, Nancy Jaman and the business office are doing a fabulous job where they just got us an extra 3% back from PA Health and Wellness. So that's going to be in there as well, more revenue coming in.
And it's not a huge amount. I mean, percentages can be tricky because you can have something go from $20 to 10 and it's a huge percentage. But I see Medicare Part B at the bottom and Medicare AB coinsurance are scheduled down.
Yeah, and so remember, Mr. Heckman, with the medical assistance, These are choice-driven programs. So based on the case mix index and where currently people are, we may have somebody who was there that picked UPMC,
Yeah.
but now AmeriHealth Mercy seems to work better for them, so they move to AmeriHealth Mercy, where a new person picks AmeriHealth Mercy. So that's why those numbers look the way they do. It doesn't necessarily represent a decrease, it represents potentially a change in choice.
Okay, so that's what that you brought up the word, because you have to base this on the potential.
Right.
Correct.
So, I mean, would this be Steve, if there was a change, I don't want to say dramatic, but there was a change, that would be a budget amendment type of issue, or would that just flow with the?
So the revenue that's in here
Yeah.
is based on the choice. The revenue we anticipate to be largely the same based on the census we've projected.
Right.
Those numbers within the revenue line item based on the person's choice may change, if that makes sense. So if somebody doesn't
Makes
have
sense.
AmeriHealth Mercy and goes to UPMC, the number will move around in the line item where we credit the revenue, but the revenue will largely remain the same because that revenue is coming in, it's just coming under a different stream.
And they can change that every 30 days. They have the right to
Right.
choose.
That was my question I wanted to piggyback. So this is not like they're selecting now for the year, they could opt at any time.
Every month, they can change.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Since Steve is standing there, because then I just want to look down at charges. At the other insurance, you're projecting a drop of almost $1.5 million.
So you'll notice the drop in Medicare Part A, right?
Yeah,
So Medicare Part A for the short-term rehab only covers part of that short-term rehab stay. Most people have some sort of supplemental plan to get them through. And that being the case, the other insurance wouldn't be charged because we are not doing that short-term rehab right now.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, you cleared it up for me. Thank you.
You always get the right to double dip. Any other questions, Mr. Cusick?
To follow up to Mr. Heckman's question, you had said or mentioned the projected census. What is the projected census that you are basing your budget on?
500,
500?
getting up to 500.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear that. I think that's much more accurate than what you did last year. And then the other piece, while we're on the revenue, is medical assistance IGT, intergovernmental transfer. I noticed that our projected this year is 25.8 million, and the projected for next year is about, what is that, 20.9 or 21? Why do you anticipate a decrease in the projected IGT revenue?
Actually, didn't that just change?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry about it.
Nope, so we just got the estimated letter from IGT. It's not formalized yet. We didn't get the contract. So the projected revenue is 41,351,000, and our expenditures is 26,979,000. So that's a net gain of 14.372.
So basically, for putting that money up, we are going to get, for putting the 26 million up, we are going to get 14.3 back.
Okay, so that's more than what you've put in this. Can you
Correct.
get us an amendment for that?
Well, when we don't have the contract, so this is gonna be what we put forward. We don't have the signed contract yet. That comes in January or February. When we do the human service budget amendment like we do every year, that will be included in there when we sign the final contract.
Okay, so that's all I had for revenue, if we're ready to move on to expenses.
Do we have a fiscal manager yet? Did you hire someone?
I have a lead accountant, yes, Doreen.
Any other questions?
In general,
Yeah, well, I guess, it's all grayscale, so we've got 4 pages, so
well,
if you want to move
I
to
don't
the
wanna-
expenditure side? Or do you want to stay on the revenue
no,
side?
I had a personnel question, and.
Go ahead, then.
I guess I'll just do it, and then I'll probably be finished. Hopefully, I'm sure everybody hopes. On your personnel summary, and I'm going back to page 14 in the white book, I see that we're getting rid of 19 positions.
Those are FTEs. So it's the
Oh, they're
full-time,
FTEs.
right, with that. So it's, right.
Oh, I'm sorry, I looked under full-time. I wasn't sure, you know, if they were all one or the other. So all 19 are FTEs.
Right, so it's 19 full-time, right.
FTEs.
Mr. Heckman, in the white page of the book, which I
Yeah.
guess is your page 167, if you look at the last paragraph and read that, that summarizes exactly the changes that Dawn presented to you
In June.
in June.
Oh, yeah, I did. I read, but I was just still. All right. Now, I know you did put in that paragraph, Steve, it says that you continue to budget some salaries and fringe benefits at less than 100% of the total, which makes sense because we're never at 100%. What percentage are we using?
It is 10% for non-union and 20% for union.
That's the staffing we're budgeting for?
Correct. That's the vacancy factor.
Oh, well, then, that's the vacancy factor. So you're budgeting to have 80%.
Correct.
Okay, you sort of threw me there for a second. But that makes sense then. All right, and I'm just looking here, let's see, I had read through, but I don't know why I didn't. Okay, you know what? That answered the question, thank you very much.
So I did want to put in there, I was missing something on that sheet that we talked about, you know, the budget changes. There is a RN staff development position, and we would like to downgrade it. So we're budgeted at an RN amount, I wanted to say 63,000, but we'd like to change it to an LPN in the staff development department. So you're looking at about, I think we said about 50,000 for it. And that allows us to have more flexibility out on the units with the LPN in training.
And we will provide that to council with to consider with your budget amendments. That is not in your book.
Right.
So have these personnel changes occurred already, or are we pink slipping people? What's the process?
It's an open position right now. So
It's
we're,
just will remain unfilled?
correct, until January.
All of the ones that you've mentioned?
Yes, they are all empty positions. Nobody's been in them.
Mr. Cusick?
Okay, on the, I'm looking at some of the personnel expenditures first. Overtime wages, you project this year to finish at about 2.7, and we're budgeting next year for, looks like, what, 3.9? Can you talk maybe about overtime wages? Do you think that'll be significant, or why the big increase from what's projected to what you're budgeting?
So right now, the home is at, Jen and I talked earlier, it's at 407 residents. To get up to 500 residents based on the projection of what the case mix index would look like, for a home of 500 with the vacancy factor, that is what would be needed for overtime. So would we get to that? Maybe, maybe not, depending on how we ramp up the census. So we're planning for the 500. So all of those numbers, plans for the 500, knowing that we don't have the staffing, we'd have to ramp up the staffing, and we'd also have to ramp up the reimbursements from Medicare, Medicaid, and all the other reimbursements that those residents would be entitled to.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense then. Then the next one is salaries union part-time. This year, we expect, what is that, about 1.8, and next year, it's like 5.6 million for part-time. Are you adding a lot of part-time union salaries? I'm on page 175, salaries union part-time.
Right, so that's the contracts that were finalized, and we're also hoping, but part-time is where we've had our weaknesses, so we're hoping to fill those positions that are already there.
Wait, Joan, what page are you on?
I'm on 175 in your blue book. It says salaries, union, part-time. The,
175 is
Oh, I'm-
mental health. Do you have a different?
170.
sorry, I'm in,
One
oh,
second.
170, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's, the line item is, what is it, 50250?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, salaries, union, part-time. This year's projected, like I said, it looks like it's 1.8, and it goes up to, what is that, 5.6? I'm still, that's a big,
It is a big jump, but you'll also notice that the union full-time goes down in that. So there were 19 positions removed, and when you model out what the home would look like at 500 beds, that is the ideal staffing, that is where those positions would be. Now, if we hire more full-time people, or that would change, those numbers may move around. But for 500 people, at the case mix we have, and the ideal staffing for the home to make sure we keep that PPE up? PPD up, that is the number, and that's where it should be.
so that would mean you would have to hire additional part-time staff, or is that using existing positions that you have?
Those positions all exist. They all exist.
Are they filled?
No,
Well,
because there's a vacancy factor built into that, Mr. Cusick.
yeah, that number, it really, I don't know, we'll see if you get there. The other one, workman's comp, that's up 24%. Have we seen an increase in the rates? Is that something that?
So workers' comp is up throughout the budget. You'll probably have noticed that trend. We had a rather large fund balance in our workers' comp because we are self-insured. Now we've sort of lived off that fat. We've gotten that down, and we have to start contributing. Graysdale is no exception to that. They're contributing as they're supposed to.
Okay. Yeah, just moving on down. The next one is miscellaneous employee benefits. This year, it's projected to be 44 million. Next year, 9.2. Is that because of the rescue plan money? and
It's the rescue
daycare?
plan money, it's the daycare. So, I mean, we put in retention and recruitment, $10 million. Agency was 1 million. We still probably need another 1 million for that in the daycare. So we put in, $13 million along with the other CARES Act money that got pushed through. So that money disappears, obviously, because it's a one-time expense.
So the rescue plan money is indicated in that line item that, okay, all right, now that makes sense then. And then the other question I had was agency nurses. Where is that reflected, and what do you expect
So
for
that is under
expenditure?
professional services. That is under professional services.
Okay.
It is the 7.2 actual to projected 9.5.
Yeah, so your projected for this year is what, 10.3 million, and you're budgeting 16.5 about?
So
Under professional services, that's on 172.
that is correct, yes.
So you're anticipating that goes up by about $6 million?
Actually, 3.2 million, because we budgeted in 2022, 19 million. We're projected for 10 million right now. So it's actually going down 16.
Yeah, I mean,
$3 million.
I see that, but the reality is that you're projecting to only spend 10.3. I mean, I know there's vacancy and other issues there, but.
The census was rather low at Graysdale this year. We're back up to 407, and with our
Okay.
census being at 500, that is the number that models out based on the trends we see. And the reality is, we're gonna still need to use agency nurses.
Okay, so what would, it's not really, it doesn't say agency nurses, I assume it's that professional services line.
It is.
How much of that 9 million is agency nurses?
Probably about, yeah, I would say it's probably gonna be about 8.8, if I had to guess.
And if I recall, earlier this year, that was an issue that was discussed when we did rescue plan money, and I guess we indicated if you needed more to come back to us. Have you spent all of your allocation, or?
We anticipate spending the 2022 $1 million in 2022. So 2023, there's no rescue plan money budgeted. We had asked for that $1 million. We'll probably be back for it. Like I said, we'll be back for it.
What you said.
All right, yeah.
But can I just have a clarification?
Yeah.
You won't be back this year for it, you may be back next year.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm glad that you budgeted for what I think is a more appropriate census number this year. So thank you, that's all I had.
We are hoping that the dependency on agency is going to decrease significantly because we are already getting people calling us for positions, for jobs full-time, once the daycare opens.
My question is, where are the daycare numbers reflected? Is that staff reflected in your staffing numbers, or are they being reflected somewhere else?
It's a contract. We're hiring a company from outside. It's not in our staffing numbers. It's a contract. We have a company coming in that will be managing the daycare.
So where is that in this budget? Is it in
It's in the 2 million.
Graysdale, or is it in Human Services,
So,
or is
right,
it somewhere else?
We anticipate, so we've spent, you gave us $2 million from the CARES Act. We spent $80,000 thus far. We have another 1.9 million. That will sustain us through 2023. When we propose our 2024 budget, that's when we'll have that discussion.
But I don't know that you answered my question. Where is that reflected in this budget?
It's under the CARES Act money.
In Graysdale or
Yes,
somewhere
it's
else?
in
Yes, it's always
Graysdale.
in Graysdale, yes.
Graysdale is its own standalone fund.
So you're keeping the daycare as part of
Correct.
Graysdale money?
Yes.
Anybody else have questions?
No, I just, we're doing budget now, but I just wanted to again say, we have a meeting next, and then we can go over more programmatic, things. We have the audit Mr. McClure gave us, so that's why I'm not going to get into anything other than the budget.
Mr. Gafredo?
So you obviously project the hiring of union part-time employees, as Mr. Cusick talked about. And obviously you are projecting an increase in professional services. Is there a situation where if you get all of the potential part-time union employees that you're looking to acquire, that you would be lower on the professional pooled services or the professional services than the temp nurses? Does that make sense? So if you get
Yes.
100% of the nurses that you're hoping to get, would you still be seeking that much money or looking to possibly use that much money in the temp nurses?
So obviously, people are coming back to long-term care very slowly. But yes, so if we can get those employees under our belt, the agencies would go down dramatically.
And is there ever a scenario, maybe pre-pandemic, where you're not using staffing nurses at all? Or is
We-
there always being supplemented in there?
There was always, it started about 2007, it was more prevalent that we started using agency.
Okay, thank you.
No other question? Okay, thank you. Next, we have mental health. And that is 168 in the white and 174, 75, and 76 in the blue.
Okay, so mental health, some highlights for you. You will see, and Mr. Heckman, I think this is what you referenced at the beginning. It looks like our revenue and grant funding has decreased significantly. It has not. That's the fiscal year to calendar year issue. So the budget amendment in this past budget amendment, spring of 2022, showed an increase in almost $3 million because of underspending the July to December of last year. So it gets a little confusing, but it's really, as we've talked about, Mr. Heckman, it's really just the timing issue. So our allocation for mental health has not changed. This is simply on paper here. When you do it in a calendar year, it looks different, and it catches up to itself in the budget amendments.
Yeah, if I may, I'm sorry, if I may. You can see that, I mean, I guess an example would be if you look at the Human Service Block Grant state allocation, you can get a good sense, I think, of things where in 2022, the budgeted for, let's say, the block grant was $16,977,000, but you're projected at $14,736,000. And you're budgeting for 2023, $12,952,000. It's a $4 million drop, but you're saying that that's not going to occur.
Correct.
And I guess that would be the same with the the state allocation. Because, again, that was budgeted at $263,000. The projection is actually $151,000, but we're budgeting $120,000.
Mr. Heckman, may I ask a clarification? Are you in the,
I'm sorry, I'm in the blue book. The white book is nice, but I mean, the
You're
blue
on
book is really,
174,
yeah, I'm sorry,
correct?
174. I mean, the blue book is really the guts of everything.
could you restate what you were asking?
Okay. You had mentioned about the budget differences between years, and
Yes.
you're right, there are differences.
Yep.
But I guess I'm just trying to understand better. We budgeted this year for 2022, we budgeted almost $17 million. The actual, the projection right
Yes.
now is $14,700,000.
Right.
So we're going to come in low. The budget for 2023 is $12,952,000, which is a change of $4 million, but that would still mean that if you go by the 2022 projection, which is the entire year, we're still going to come in low.
I'm following you now that I'm in the right book.
Okay.
And the short answer is our allocation has not decreased. I have to clarify if that decrease that you think you're seeing is also in part because of the CARES money
Okay.
in terms of when that was distributed, 21, 22. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the carryovers, but I can find that out for you. But our block grant allocation has not changed. Unfortunately, it has not changed. It's been the
Right.
same for like 12 years, so.
So this
That's good and
CARES
bad
Act.
news.
Yes.
Because it hasn't gone lower, so.
It's not decreased, but essentially it's like having a cut because salaries go up every year and the allocation hasn't gone up. So the allocation hasn't changed. I think it has to do with some of the CARES money, but I will find that out and get back to you.
I guess it's just hard to follow the budget with the CARES Act money flowing in and out. And that's, okay, that I get. Because I was concerned. And the other thing was the subcontracted, and now you can get the white book, which I know most people are comfortable with, 168, page 168. The subcontracted client services is going down 31%, a drop of 4.4 million. And I was reading down here, but I didn't.
It's the same answer essentially, Mr. Heckman. Now you're just talking about the expenditures from the same, the number matches that revenue change and the expenditure change. And like I said, part of it's the fiscal calendar year, but I do suspect that the other piece of it is the CARES money.
So
So it's
in
gone.
essence, I guess the question I have is, on paper, the way it looks like, oh my God, we're really
Correct.
dropping, but it's going to stay about the same when all's said and done.
Unfortunately, yes, it's going to be the same. We were hoping this year, we talked about it here earlier in the year, there was great confidence at the state level that the mental health allocation would
Right.
increase. They provided more mental health funding,
Yeah.
but not to counties. And so at least we haven't been cut, but we've been the same for 12 years and everybody's getting paid more than they were 12 years ago. And providers obviously have to pay their people more.
Well, I just wanted to
Everything-
clarify, because
Yeah.
in black and white, it doesn't look good, but, I think that's the point. And so as long as we're hanging in there, that's the good thing.
We are making do as best we do, which is what that's what we do.
Right, and the CARES, and again, the CARES Act, I guess, is throwing me off in certain areas, because I always like to look at the budget year we're in, what we budgeted, and then what we're projected we're going to spend, and that's across the board, not just with you.
Nope, fair.
And then I look at what we're looking to do, and try and reconcile them, because the good thing about looking at the budget, the actual budget and projected, that already takes into account different budgets at different times. I mean, that's our year and the money we got. So I'm glad that your mental health budget isn't going down. I'm disappointed that we're not seeing an increase in the.
And I do have in my notes, Cindy, I'm sure, the fiscal people speak more eloquently than I can at times, but when Cindy and I reviewed it, the subcontracted services are not decreasing. It really is in large part the timing. And I think maybe even at the next budget amendment, maybe that can be a different conversation to go into a little more detail about that.
But can I just ask?
Go ahead, I'm finished.
Is there a way for you to get something from her that shows? Because I
Oh, yeah,
realize that
yep.
your process
Yes.
doesn't line up, but for us to be able to reconcile that,
Very-
if you could get a
Yes.
sheet to us next week or something, because we have budget hearings for the
Yes.
next 2 weeks, that would be really helpful.
Sure.
Or how much of it was CARES Act that's gone versus money that is anticipated to return, that would be great.
Perfect. Yep.
And maybe where that money's coming from or what pools it's coming from, that would help a lot. I guess,
I'm finished.
I'm sorry to do
No,
that.
no.
I mean, if we're talking about it and we keep saying it and it's not visual, it doesn't help sometimes. And I probably forgot what I was gonna say, so I'll open it to somebody else if they wanted to go, and
Just
I'll
a-
remember.
General comment on mental health. This is a line item that CCAP has been lobbying hard for years to try to get this. And, I get a lot of flyers and see commercials for people running for state representative and state senator. And I guess it's just not sexy to say, well, I provided more mental health funding for my district.
Yeah.
I think that's the unfortunate thing. So, I mean, we'll keep pressing for it, but,
I think it was most disappointing this year out of every year because even the state reps that we spoke to were really confident that we would see a budget increase. So every other year, it just is sort of like, well, here we go again. But this year, it was like a real punch to the gut, so.
Yeah, and if I may, with John, what he said, Madam Chair, is given that we're coming out of COVID, and given that we've had, they've all been going on about with the shootings, that we need more mental health, more mental health, more mental health. It's very, very disappointing, and
Yes.
that's across the board in Harrisburg, that we don't see them move on this. And I agree when he says about it not being sexy, because people, for years I've said, well, we're in county government, the least sexy branch of government there is. I mean, you start telling people what we do, they fall asleep. But I mean, you can't do anything about it. I assume you're looking for every grant you can find and all kinds of things like that.
Our folks are good at that, yes. They did get increased funding for crisis intervention training, which is our CIT program for police officers, law enforcement, first responders, which is already a phenomenal program that mental health and Gary helps with those folks in mental health as well. And so we did get a grant to expand that, which is great, but you're right, that's the only way we're going to get increased funding is applying for specific grants.
Sorry.
Any other questions?
Well, yesterday, Mental Health Committee met, and so you'll be seeing that we're advocating for the same things, if not more, as well as for staffing. Those were the priority items that CCAP voted on last year. I think they'll rise to the top again.
Yep.
And it's, I guess I had a question under the subcontracted services.
Sure.
Are those the actual vendors, or is the OTR, LSR, whatever, was the alphabet building in there?
ORLTSR.
I'm never gonna get it. I just surrender. I almost had it once.
It
and I
was so
just quit.
close, yeah.
But is that in there? Where's that money? Would that be considered a subcontract because we have a vendor that's providing the
The
service?
ORLTSR funding is a separate, that's not in the,
It is health choices.
It's a Health Choices funding?
it's
Oh,
health.
so we'll get there then.
It's
So these
it's reinvestment plan
subcontracts
funding,
have
my
nothing to do
mistake.
with that building, and that's specifically all our vendors that we use to provide
Correct.
services from it.
Correct.
Done, thank you.
You're welcome.
She's come. If anybody's getting money, it's gonna be you, right? That will increase yours. Developmental programs next, 169. 177. Oh,
so-
and do we want to say, let me
Oh,
Tiffany say hi, because you know she's hiding.
Yes, I do. Tiff Crush is our mental health, early intervention, developmental programs administrator. Did I miss anybody either? I don't think so. Okay. So personnel costs on this look like they went up even higher than maybe some of those other divisions, but that is because earlier in the year, council, you approved 3 new full-time positions, which we are very grateful the state provided funding for, and they will continue to provide that funding for us. And so those 3 salaries are now annualized in this budget. Admin supply costs are down because we had to purchase the workstations and the such for those 3 new employees, and we won't have to do that next year. And those are really the highlights from developmental programs.
Any questions? Mr. Gafredo?
Yeah, this is more of a technicality on how the intergovernmental revenue works, but I see in 2022, they projected, or you're projected to bring in 2.194 million, and the budget allotted for 2.4. What makes up for that shortfall? Why short around?
Well, I think the projected is, let me not answer, I might give you the wrong answer.
It's based on what we needed to use out of the.
Actually
Human
spent.
Services Block Grant.
Okay, so it's based on what we're actually
Gotcha.
using
That makes
from the
sense.
block grant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we getting more money in this pool,
No.
or?
We didn't,
This is-
no, children and youth is the only one who got a little bit of increased funding, but nothing substantial there either.
Do you want to introduce the director? We have a new director this year.
We do, but if early intervention's next, if you want to.
Well, the developmental director?
Oh, no, it's just Tiff oversees developmental programs as well. We have a newer deputy, but she is not here. No, just Tiff
Oh,
is here.
okay.
Sorry, misunderstood.
Because Wendy left, right?
Wendy Novak left. Lisa Gaiman is our new deputy for developmental programs and has been doing a great job getting our providers in tip-top shape.
Has demand gone up? Because I remember when we could have meetings that we were in continually
They
getting
expanded
increased requests.
They expanded some of the eligibility for the autism waiver, and they added medically fragile as a category. So that and some additional administrative oversight are why the state provided us additional funding for 3 new positions.
Early intervention next?
So early intervention is an entitlement program. So if you're a child between 0 and 3 or 3 to 5 and you have a delay in one developmental area, I think it's at least 25% or greater, you are entitled to receive early intervention services. So while there is a budget for it, there have been times over the last 4 years that I've been here that we have gone over budget because it's an entitlement program and we have to provide it. But the state then provides us reimbursement for what we spend. So I think I told you guys a couple of years ago that they sent a Survey Monkey out one year to say, how much more money do you need? That was how we told them how much more. Survey Monkey. I'm not making it up. So I'm serious, yes. And the spring 2022 budget amendment showed an increase in revenue by $224,000. But again, that's another example of, it's simply that we underspent, if you will, the first 6 months of the year by that same amount. So it was put into the pot for the first half of this year.
Any other questions? Okay. Children, youth, and families.
So Maria Torres is our administrator. She's here. Hi, Maria. The highlights from this budget. Again, you'll see the personnel costs having increased. We've talked about that already. The operating costs have gone down a little bit, about 100, not a little bit, it's relative, 120,000. And that is primarily because the bulk of our work and payment to our consultants in New Zealand has been completed. And so stay tuned in the next couple of months. I'm pretty sure I'll be back with the presentation on our tool. And the capital costs for children and youth include computers, which they're on a 3 or 4 year refresh cycle. It's a little bit different than the counties. And the state provides the funding for children and youth technology refreshes. So we get that money we get the money directly from the state for technology. It also includes 2 new vehicles that are both over 100,000 miles. And originally, when we got approval for 2 new vehicles from the state through our needs-based budget for children and youth, they approved that at the cost of $25,000 apiece. And I believe that, which a few years ago we got, and I think that cost is closer to 40 grand a vehicle now. So we actually had to get permission to, spend more money on those. So we're in the process of getting ready to relinquish the 2 we have, and if the budget's approved, then we'll purchase the other 2 vehicles. Any questions?
On children, youth, and families? you were?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, how many positions are you budgeting for, and how many are currently filled?
So we have 164 approved positions, and it's right around the same number as the last time I was here and we asked. I think we were at about 38 vacancies. We've brought in some new folks, and some other folks have left. So we are, the good news is, there's 2 good news on that front. The civil service lists, I was a little afraid that, all of a sudden, we had this big influx of applicants for caseworker and clerical positions, and I was a little afraid that maybe they just had forgotten about us for a few months, and it was a once and done. But we're fortunate, we are continuing every 2 weeks to at least get lists with folks on them. So I'm finally back to seeing emails from our assistant administrator who does the hiring. Almost every Monday, there's 1 or 2 new folks coming into the agency. My assistant, we've talked about the civil service piece, so I won't go on and on about that, but the biggest piece that we didn't know we would have to do for the last 4 years, I think maybe I mentioned this, I apologize if I'm repeating myself. The state had said to us, don't give us your updated salary information for union staff because we didn't have a technically assigned contract or something. And so they had to go back and go through every single employee for the last 4 years, every annual increase they got, every person who was promoted, laterally transferred. And so my assistant and this woman carved out just a ton of time. And I got an email yesterday saying that she has now finished that process and there's just a few loose ends to tie up. So the civil service piece, we're really getting close to. So we have a meeting set up with HR to really ramp up our recruitment efforts especially for children and youth.
Okay, so out of that 168 approved positions, again, how many of those are current?
Oh, I'm sorry, there's about 38 vacancies. It's the
38.
same as last time, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I don't know if you were here, but we saw a presentation last week for corrections officers and 911, how some of the creative things they've done to, you were, okay.
No, I was not here, but that's why we are now meeting with HR to.
I
Yep.
guess my question is, are you somewhere on that list? Because
Yes.
certainly, I think that after those 2, I think this department
Yeah.
might be most deserving of that.
Assistance. Yeah.
Well, the new way that they're going about
Yes.
recruitment. So I guess that was my question. Do you anticipate changing the way you recruit?
Yes.
Something similar to what we saw from those departments?
Absolutely. And so instead of waiting until we have the letter that we're out of civil service, we're meeting now to be able to really hit the ground running. And there might be some things that we can do that they're doing now, even before we get out of civil service. I don't know that yet. I have to find that out, but 100%. I'm cautiously optimistic that when we're out of civil service, we'll at least be able to fill the positions quicker than we currently are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at the evidence-based practices grant. and I see that's going to go up. What exactly, could you refresh my memory on that?
Some of those? Yes. So some of the different therapies, there are different therapies that the state has approved. So when Family First came in, there was a list of evidence-based practices that you could sort of pick and choose from in order to, it's a bigger picture to receive eligibility for different funding. So for us, I can get that list to you, Mr. Heckman, of what they all are. But I'll give you one, for example, that we used to use, the high fidelity wraparound services. And so generally speaking, they're different therapies, whether it's in-home therapy, a family therapy, or individual therapy. But it's not just necessarily traditional talk therapy. Could be CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That's an evidence-based program. So it has to be something that's been researched and proven to be, to have a positive impact in order to make it into the evidence-based line items.
Is that revenue, that grant for the state-based grant, or?
There might be federal dollars in there, I'm not sure, but it's not, there's a small county match, I believe, but it's primarily state dollars.
The other one then was right there with it, homeless assistance.
Yes.
That's going down?
Yes, but the interesting thing with the evidence, there's some amount of, as I'm sure you're familiar with, shifting that is able to be done. So the homeless assistance can be things like Safe Harbor and Third Street Alliance for shelter. Children and Youth also has funding for very short-term hotel stays for families if the only issue is homelessness, and in order to prevent that child from having to come into foster care, if they need a short-term hotel until they can get into an apartment, they have that funding. So that's what they're using that for. So we have the flexibility, even if that's gone down, to pull from some other categoricals if we needed to.
Okay, but the actual source of that, I mean, you can pull from other areas, but that in and of itself is projected to go down?
I'll confirm that that's not just a timing issue and it actually is going down.
Yeah, I just, I mean, in some of the things, it's not a lot of money overall, like I said earlier about the percentages can really throw you.
Yes.
I don't want to get into that, but if it starts to add up, that's when I end up having, more of a question about it. And I mean, with children, youth, and families, your funding sources have traditionally been all over the place. And that's, so I'm just looking if something really seems to be, and you give me far too much credit for what you say I might know. You have no idea how much I forget. But anyway, that's.
I can appreciate that.
It's a lot jammed in your head, and over time, you sort of let it slides out. But, okay, that's pretty much all I had questions
I'll
about.
confirm
Thank
that
you.
for you, though, Mr. Heckman.
That's not a problem.
I'll let you know.
But
Thank
the-
you.
But part of the evidence base is also the New Zealand project, correct?
No, that's not in the evidence-based.
That's not considered an.
No, that was Act 148 dollars and probably a combination of county dollars that we used to pay for that, yep.
Okay. Any other question? I hate to, ballpark caseload of how many constituents are being served under children and youth just today?
Well, we have 273 youth as of Monday in out-of-home care. And I will give some credit here to Maria Torres and her team. That number is down from about 319 earlier this year. And that is a top priority of ours. Obviously, the fewer kids we have to have in care, the better for families and youth. And then there's additional families that we're serving, just providing in-home services or diversionary services where we refer them to a community agency that can help them with certain things in order to not have to become homeless or end up in out-of-home placement.
And the complex case mix, does that come under,
That is
or is that?
a
just
loaded
everybody
question.
meets and complains every,
Well, you know what, the complex case essentially is
commiserates?
commiserates, there you go. Essentially, when the applicable divisions come together to discuss the more difficult kids with issues that might stem in children, youth, and mental health and developmental programs. It's not that it's a complaining session all the time. The problem is we still need this. We still need help from the state.
There's nowhere to send them.
There is that.
That's why you complain. There's nowhere to go.
That's correct.
But I just wonder, how many of those do we have?
Not many, but we're working on, now that we have a CAS coordinator who's been in that position a while, we're working on revamping our internal processes. So even when, historically, maybe if we thought it wouldn't be helpful, maybe we didn't put it on complex case, but what we have found out is this the only way the state knows that we have these issues is when we put them on complex case and present them. So we just are tightening up our internal processes first to make sure we truly have exhausted all county internal resources before we take it to that state level complex case.
So, but when you say that there's 273 in out-of-home placements, but that's not how many constituents we have involved in children and youth. I guess
Correct.
What I'm getting at is if you have 164 approved positions, and are those 273 individuals or cases, like
Individuals.
family?
No, individuals, yes.
So you have ballpark how many clients?
I can get you a number. I don't know we don't have the in-home services number offhand, but we can get that for you. I'm making a list.
What about training? Is training covered by the state, or are there additional training
Yes.
things that you need?
No, caseworkers have to have, I think it's about 160 hours of training. It's called the Foundations Program. If I'm not mistaken, they've changed it a few times. It's offered through the University of Pittsburgh's Child Welfare Resource Center. So during the 6 months of probation, staff have to complete all of those training hours. They start to have a small caseload, and then we build them up to what a typical caseload is. And we don't have a formal mentoring program, but they shadow experienced staff and things like that too, as part of their training process. It's a lot of training.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Nothing else for that? Area, and then Maria, everybody's met Maria before, but if you want to wait.
Maria has been here, yes.
Area Agency on Aging.
So Lori is here. She's the aging administrator. Okay. So in this budget, you will see an increase in the intergovernmental funding, which is up because of an increase. Okay, so I lied, Mr. Heckman, we got an increase in some aging funding. So it's an increase in the state block grant funding and the ARP money that was received from the state. So it's not huge dollars. The state has allowed aging to carry over their unspent ARP money from this year into next year. And so we're pleased with that. I mean, we did all sorts of things to try to make sure that that money didn't have to get sent back to the state. You will see I just wanted to mention this, the fees, fines, charges, and miscellaneous. I realize it's going up, it's a small number, but in the notes, it talks about the cost share revenue that we anticipate a small increase in. And essentially the cost share, I equate it to something like a copay. So if our older adults are receiving in-home services, maybe their cost share is $50 a week that they have to pay towards those services, and aging pays the rest. And I'm making up that number. So it's not a big number, but I just thought it was an interesting fact about how the aging, some of the aging programs work. And the operating costs are down a bit because of the completion of some various senior center projects we completed. One of them was, it's one of these things that no one likes to spend money on. It was not soundproofing, but our newest senior center, which is the Palmer Center, is in an old bounce U, so the ceilings were really high. And the echo was just unbelievable. So it was pretty costly they went in and they hung these things in it. And the senior center participants and the staff are thrilled. It had such an echo before, so that's not something that we necessarily want to spend money on, and so that was a good use of our ARP funding. That's just one example of the things they used. So those are my highlights for aging. Are there any questions?
Where are we with staffing? Because I know we've added some, and the
We
state
are-
has reimbursed that, correct? So how many
Correct.
case managers?
So we are fully staffed for protective services. We have added over the last, since I've been here, we've added 2 or 3 case managers just for protective services, and a case aide for protective services, and a supervisor. And I will tell you, Lori told me the other day, they're still drowning. Just the reports of need for the aging folks just continue to go up. And so, we're watching those trends, but her folks she has a tremendous team. And we are still working on hiring a few folks in our assessment unit, but, they all pitch in and they get things done. And, Lori leads by example in that aspect, and they're getting it done. So we have a couple of vacancies.
Services?
60.
Oh, man. Go ahead, Ron.
60.
I had 2 questions.
Sure.
I'm in too. But I see and it's not much, but our county contribution went down $12,000. I mean, was there a reason we cut the 12,000?
Oh, it's just in terms of what is required for unallowable expenses primarily. So,
Oh, you're saying match, like a match grant, a matching?
right, so the county dollars for aging are used on our all of our unallowable costs in aging
Right.
are paid for with county dollars. And then some of the county dollars also go towards the subcontracted services. So based on that, it's not a big enough swing that I have a good answer for you of.
I was just wondering why we had to cut their budget $12,000. Aging is one of the places where they don't get a lot from the state. And
There has been some turnover in staff. That could also lead to it. People on the lower, are now coming in at the lower level. So our reimbursement is a little bit less, but we also don't have to kick up as much.
Well, I know, but.
Actually, Steve's right in terms of, we've had a few key staff who've been here at the county for 30-plus years who have gone, mostly they go to retire in Gary's division. And so they do. So really those, in terms of, we've had some significant salary shifts in terms of people who've been here 30 to 40 years compared to somebody who's been at the county for 3 or 4 years.
Speaking of which, are you still getting a lot of experienced people leaving to go out of CYF to other vacancies? I mean, within your department?
The number had been down for quite some time. We've had some folks that are going to be going up to mental health, and I think somebody to early intervention, but I want to knock on wood and say that number's been fewer folks coming out of CYF to go to the 3rd floor than previously.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, and look, I don't want to, I understand with the county contribution, because it can go up and down, and there was a time when Human Services, and Cindy Smith remembers this, we'd get beat up about, how much over, you only had to put so much in to get a certain amount back, and anything over that was almost considered gravy. Yet the thing is, it's like, but we do a lot of things that the state may say, well, we won't reimburse, but it helps keep the overall cost down. So I always thought some councils would get into this artificial argument of, oh, you better not spend 1 nickel more than what is required by the state. And I always thought that was BS, because we do that everywhere, but Human Services was easy to put a target on. Made for a good speech. Anyway, I did have one other thing
Sure.
that jumped out, and that was the overtime wages. And maybe that has to do with what you were saying about staffing. That's taking a bit of a jump.
Can you just
Oh,
point me
I'm
to,
sorry.
I know the
I'm very
answer to the
sorry.
question,
I'm in
but
the blue book again, and I'm
Page
looking at
187?
187, and it's
there it is, yes.
overtime wages I see are going up. So is the union part-time. Is a function of that expectations of needing to do more because of lower staff?
Not, most of the, so the on-call, which is after hours,
Right.
and that's part of that overtime. So if somebody works 40 hours a week and they do on-call, then
Oh, okay.
then they're getting their overtime.
Yeah.
But you're right, it has gone up, and it's twofold. It's maybe threefold. It's that the salaries went up for the union contracts. It's that the protective services folks are working overtime for their regular, I'll say 9 to 5 jobs to keep up with the pace of referrals. And then the rest of it is the overtime from the on-call. If they're having to go out more frequently, then those are the out time hours that are paid at time and a half for overtime. So I would have expected that.
I wish I had a picture of the look that as you came up like the lurker. And I'm sorry, Steve. That was just classic.
To clarify, Mr.
Yeah, to
Heckman,
clarify.
we are not cutting the Area Agency on Aging budget. We are not cutting salaries. What we were talking about is the contribution the county is making because we are able to draw down. The Area Agency on Aging has plenty of money. No seniors are losing any services.
I didn't think they were. It was a question. But if you ever can do that again, I'll make sure I have my camera ready because that was perfect.
Stealth.
That's on camera.
Oh, lucky me.
Might be.
Lucky me.
Anyway, that's it. That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Aging, it's important.
The subcontracted services, are those mostly for the senior centers, or are there other?
No, so our options program is one of our larger divisions in aging, and so that's your in-home care services. We currently, so if somebody needs assistance, whether that's just, like bathing and dressing and those kinds of things compared to nursing care, we have a waiting list for that. It's not for lack of funding, which it has been in prior years. It's because our agencies don't have enough staff to provide those services. And so there's a wait list that comes in, first come, first serve, except then they become prioritized by need, right? So if there's a protective services referral that comes in and that person needs services, they're automatically bumped up to the top of the list.
Any other questions? Moving on to drug and alcohol.
Kathy Gurley was here earlier this year, but Kathy is our newer drug and alcohol administrator. This budget is, wonky's the best word that's coming to my mind at this point. So drug and alcohol has, one of their funding sources operates on the federal fiscal year. So when the budget's prepared, we don't have that allocation to include. And on top of that, we have, sometimes we don't even get the allocation until November, December, that kind of a thing. So it appears that the intergovernmental revenue has decreased by 37.3%. It has not. One of our funding streams technically expired on September 29th, and that's our SOAR funding. But we were notified that we're able to carry over the unused funds from that grant, which we'll be able to do. So it's not, our allocation has not yet decreased. There's a bunch of line items, not a bunch, there's a couple of funding sources in drug and alcohol that when the opioid crisis hit 4 or 5 years ago, there was additional funding that counties received. And as of now, that funding has continued year after year. There's no guarantee that it will continue to in perpetuity. And the hope is that we, if it's a different substance, that we still get that money. But the opioid settlement money, which, as I said, is not in this budget, you'll see it in the budget amendment, that will certainly supplement any shortfalls we might have, but we are not expecting any. Any questions?
If I may?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a comment and then a couple questions. From time to time, we see the federal budget where they pass continuing resolutions for, a month or a couple months. That's the source of your problem. How absurd is it for what we pay members of Congress and the Senate that they can't pass a budget on a regular basis? But that is the issue. It comes out of Washington and it's dysfunction. And that's gone on for years and years and years, which party controlled the House, the Senate, the presidency. passing continuing resolutions is just bad government. My question has to do with the Human Services Block Grant allocation for drug and alcohol. I noticed that's, what is that, 938,000 is the estimated. So I guess my question more is, since we know that money is fungible and the Human Services Block Grant is, if we were to receive money from the opioid settlement, could that be replaced and the Human Services Block Grant moved someplace else if that were to come to fruition?
Yes, theoretically, that's the joy of the block grant, is we can move it around between a few of the divisions. And so if there was if we were getting into a time when drug and alcohol just had too much excessive funding and mental health had a shortfall, yes, we absolutely have the ability to shift that around.
Yeah, because that's something that I think we should consider. We don't know yet what's going to come down the pike, but I think that that's something to consider, looking at that line item if we do come into money from the
Sure.
opioid settlement.
I thought we did know the money that we're getting.
Oh, yeah, we are, I mean, yes. And
We've been
it's
told, right? How much
Yes,
we're getting?
it's about,
But it's not in the budget.
It's not in the budget yet, so it's in, but it came in after the budget books were prepared. So I think it only came in the last week or two, maybe 3, I do lose track of time. So it's a little more than $500,000 for human services. And that will be thank you, Steve, in a separate, that will be in the budget amendment, excuse me.
One for the '23 budget or sometime next year? What-
It will be, Steve told me it would be in the spring 2023 budget amendment, the opioid settlement funding,
Okay.
right?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Any more questions for drug and alcohol?
I do, but I don't. Again, the decrease in subcontracted services, who are the subcontracted providers?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
Page 192.
I missed the beginning of your question.
There's a decrease in the subcontracted services, which I'm assuming you're saying isn't really a decrease.
Correct.
However, who are some of the?
Some of our providers?
Yes.
So we use Treatment Trends and Mars and Net and Pyramid. We use Recovery Revolution up in the Slate Belt. They run a recovery center up there. Treatment Trends runs 2 of our recovery centers.
Did they move to this county?
Who's they?
Treatment Trends.
Not to my knowledge yet.
So
There's
they're
some,
based in Lehigh County.
correct. As far as I know, yes, that's where their
How many
offices are.
Northampton County-based providers are we using?
I can get that for you. The majority of them are based in Northampton County, but I don't have that off the top of my head. I can get that.
But Mars is Lehigh, correct? And Treatment Trends is Lehigh. Pyramid is Lehigh.
Treatment Trends Pyramid added office space in Northampton County. They're located next to the Palmer Recovery Center across the street from Easton High School.
And then the name of the Recovery Revolutions is the.
Recovery Revolutions is up in the Slate Belt, yep.
So those are the 4 primary?
I'm sure I'm missing 1 or 2. I can get those for you. And which ones are Northampton County?
Well, I mean, because I think there's some people that we're not using, I'm hearing, and I'm just wondering, somebody brought up a comment prior to the meeting about people and services, and I guess, why are we not increasing providers and using
not aware of-
everybody available?
I'm not aware of any in the county that we're not using, but I would certainly be happy to hear that information and look into it.
Okay.
There are, as you know, there's not 25 providers, but if we're missing somebody, we're certainly
Well,
happy to
and
look
if-
at
And
it.
if not, and we're getting this opioid money, then what do we need to do to increase that presence? Because the bottom line is, that's what people need. They need treatment, they need access to treatment. All the other stuff is great.
You know, we're
People
very.
Need help, and we know it's a revolving door.
Yes.
But they need the door to be there to revolve, so.
Yes. No, we're very fortunate. I think when we talked about the opioid settlement plan and Kathy presented all of the things that we're going to do, she talked about the fact that at the moment, none of our opioid settlement money is going towards treatment because we have enough treatment funding. We're not turning anybody away for treatment. We're not having to deny anybody because we don't have funding. There are times when we can help people who have high copays because we have extra funding. And we're not, some of the wait lists that we have from time to time are those higher level acuity of beds, those detox beds and things like that, that there just are very few providers in the entire state. But at the moment, knock on wood, we're not having trouble with folks accessing treatment or us paying for treatment if it's necessary.
Go ahead.
We're working with the probation. I mean, we did in the past, that the courts would often refer cases to us to provide the drug and alcohol services. I know it would be fruitless to sort of say, hey, we may not have enough money. That wasn't something the court didn't really want to hear necessarily. So I'm just wondering, do we have a relationship with, a good working relationship with juvenile adult probation?
Yes,
'Cause
so.
I realize that prison, a lot of them come
Sure.
out and they need treatment.
Recovery court is still in full swing in the county, and so there's Kathy and her folks have a whole system for referrals and participate in that. So yes, they have a very good working
Sounds like-
relationship
yeah,
with
it
all of
sounds-
those players.
And let me just say, I think it's great, the recovery court changed that ballgame. Before that, it was whoever happened to be, what judge was upset or not upset, and departments were sort of put into war with each other, even though we didn't want to be at times. But I think that the court, the new court, is really sort of helped. It sounds like it benefits you as much as it benefits the others.
We have a very good working
I'm
relationship.
glad.
Yep,
I'm glad. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Health choices?
So Health Choices, as you know, is the medical assistance essentially for behavioral health needs. This is Magellan, and the only thing that I have of note before Mr. Barron speaks is there are no county dollars involved with Health Choices at all. Go ahead, Steve.
That's right.
So I put a pin in Mr. Brown's question earlier about the summary in the front. And it occurred to me as I was looking back over the budget why some of those numbers looked a little weird. So just to explain, Mr. Brown, so for Health Choices, which is not county dollars, but is accounted for in our budget, we started with a fund balance during the year of $23 million. So there's a lot of money in that fund for services, including that LTSR program we talked about. LTSR, okay, I got it, yeah. So we are projecting for that to increase.
What does LTSR stand for? You're just throwing
Stop.
letters out.
I'm sorry. Yeah, long-term structured residence. Thanks, Sue. So we are projecting for it to increase to $28.9 million during the year. So our funding is actually greater than our expenses in Health Choices, okay? And some years that does happen. So the balancing of the budget is in the pooled contractual services, I think, which Mr. Brown astutely pointed out. And so we budgeted 23 to 29 million to balance the fund, which is approximately 30 million higher, which is a large portion of that $40 million he pointed to early on. So just to kind of put some clarity in there so we understand where that number comes from.
Lori?
That's all.
While Mr. Barron's there, he may want to jump in on this. And I'm glad you pointed this out, Sue. This is not county money. They're big numbers, but it's all Medicaid, the program itself. The money, though, we have our vendor, which I assume is still Magellan. And then whatever is left over when we negotiate the rates is the county, our reinvestment fund.
Take that, yeah.
And so could you give an update
Sure.
budgetarily wise on where we are with our reinvestment fund, that we in fact have options to use?
We do. That's the pretty cool thing about Health Choices. So there's I'll spare you all the details of how we sometimes end up having extra money, but when we do,
Yeah.
we're able to reinvest it into programs. Now, the state has to approve those. So we've had a housing program for folks with serious mental illness since I've been here. We have a respite program for youth with intellectual disabilities that, they live with maybe birth parents, maybe family, maybe, foster families, and we can offer them respite services through that reinvestment program just to help maintain those placements, whether it's preferably in their home, but wherever they are. Social determinants of health is the hot item with the state and feds and I think with us. And so we presented a plan last year that Chelsea Jones created in our Health Choices Department, focused on social determinants of health. So we're contracted with the Easton Area Neighborhood Center on that. And so that's, if you are, just for example, a single mom trying to get started with employment, maybe you need help with childcare, maybe you need a tire, maybe you need transportation. Those are things that Medicaid typically does not pay for. But these kind of startup programs allow us to use funding for things like that. And so we have some leftover money for this year. It's less than $1 million. I don't have the exact amount, so I don't want to speculate too much. And so the plans were were this week or will be next week submitted to the state for approval for use of that money. But that takes months and months until they
I was
approve.
going to ask you that, if you don't mind. That what's left over, you can use, well, you have to ask permission, but you could use that next year.
Correct.
Do you have a number, though, for next year on what you think your balance is going to be, that your reinvestment fund itself, the number?
So we can get you what all of the reinvestment programs
Uh-huh.
are together. One of the nice things about the leftover money is, so this year it's less than $1 million, but we have other reinvestment programs
Yeah.
that have funding. I'll get you that number.
Well, we're funding them, we've been funding them, right?
Correct, so it was leftover
Yeah.
money from maybe the prior
Right.
6 years. The first thing we do when we have leftover money is backfill our risk and contingency fund. I think we can keep maybe $15, $16 million in there, so that when we have claims to pay that are above and beyond what the per member per month fees are, we have that risk and contingency fund to draw from. So that's always the first thing we do, because that's just the safest way to never need county dollars.
Okay. Now, could you explain this is the blue book again, this is really the last question I have on this. The budgetary fund balance, maybe Steve wants to jump in.
Mr. Heckman, I'm sorry, what page?
193. And I just didn't quite understand what I looked at it, and I may have just read it wrong. I'm looking at the 2022, the 2023, and the budget change. I don't quite get it.
Cindy.
It looks like it's 6 million, but
Risk and contingency.
you're projecting a $6 million change, but I only,
The revenues were
Okay.
greater than the expenditures.
okay,
So Cindy said, for those of you who didn't hear, Cindy said the revenue was greater than the expenditures.
okay, so that accounts then that 28% increase we're looking at.
And our risk and contingency, that might be called a fund balance on
Yeah.
our budget books.
That's what I was wondering. So that the fund balance on your books, that's the risk and contingency.
And that attributes to the number that Mr. Brown pointed out earlier, which is what I was talking about.
Okay. Sorry,
That's okay.
that's all it's not just what I forgot, but it's also, this is my thing. So I like to keep up to date on everything, so thank you for indulging me.
Sure.
Any other questions regarding this?
Okay.
This contract was just renewed a year ago, correct?
Yes, so we put that out.
RFP for Magellan was last year?
Yes,
For how
that,
many years?
it's 3 years with two options to renew for 1 year each, so it can be a total of 5. That contract with Magellan had been in place for about 20 years and had never been RFP'd. And so the plan was, once Robin originally was in that position before she became my deputy for a very short time, and so when Christy took over, that was the plan to put that out to bid, and we retained Magellan, but it was a very fruitful exercise, and it's an enormous contract, so
Is Lehigh still on Magellan too then?
they do. They have Magellan.
Okay. So last is the human services cost allocation.
So this includes the costs for IRIS, our Information Referral and Emergency Services, our central service costs, PCD or Program Centralized Data, and the Human Services Facilities. So these are all of those costs, and Mr. Heckman, I think you're the one who said this before, they get charged back proportionately to each division. So it's based on FTEs. So children and youth, for example, always has the biggest portion of expenses in terms of rent. In terms of IRIS, their two largest divisions that they are taking calls for are generally aging and mental health. So a lot of IRIS's chargebacks go to mental health. So that's really just a summary of how those costs are distributed amongst. Any questions?
Mr. Brown, do you want to go back to your original question since we're at the end? I have one question, and I have to go back to the beginning. And it's very simple if I can find it. So under the salaries for human services administration, full-time, part-time, page 161,
I have that access.
how many people are,
Included in that? I have let me just grab my notes. It's just easier.
because everybody else's is encompassed in their own, correct?
Yep, no, you're correct.
It's Cindy, you,
Yeah, hang on. So there are, I have it, let me just get to my right notes. So it is 4 full-time folks, so it's myself, Robin, Cindy Smith, and my assistant Georgine, as well as our part-time solicitor. And then it also includes our 9 full-time employees in Program Centralized Data, or PCD. So that's 13 and a part-timer.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Is there anybody here you didn't get to introduce us to? Because again, people took their time to come here and to do this, so.
Well, Christy Cole is the Health Choices Administrator. I did sort of bypass her. So I think that's it. Unless somebody's hiding and I can't see them.
Yeah, thank you all for your patience, but this is one of the big things we do in human services. It's important we understand.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we adjourn. Thank you.
you're doing it all day? Yes. What did you do?
I did
She's crossing her eyes. She's been doing it after dinner. By the way, Brandon isolated. What's that? The picture.